News when you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Dan Schwartzman. We check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. The Dow finished the day up 0.2%. The S&P 500 ended up slightly more than 0.5%, while the Nasdaq gained close to 0.8%. The 10-year Treasury yield is at 4.325%. The 2-year yield is at 3.882%. Brent crude is currently at just over $103 a barrel, while West Texas Intermediate is trading at over $91 per barrel. Gold extended gains after snapping a 9-day losing streak as traders weighed the likelihood of U.S.-Iran ceasefire talks. Bullion advanced as much as 2.8% to just over $4,530 an ounce, adding to a 1.6% jump in the previous session. Meta Platforms and Alphabet's Google were found liable by a jury for a 20-year-old woman who alleged that her addiction to the company's social media platforms caused her to suffer a mental health crisis. The verdict Wednesday in Los Angeles highlights the financial risk facing the companies from thousands of other suits, which claim that Instagram and YouTube are intentionally designed to addict young users without regard for their well-being. On Tuesday, a jury found Meta was liable for violating 2 state consumer protection laws and awarded civil penalties totaling $375 million, determining the company misled New Mexico teenagers about the safety of its social networks. Despite Iran publicly rejecting U.S. overtures and President Trump's 15-point list of expectations to end the war while issuing fresh conditions to end the conflict, the White House says peace talks with Tehran are ongoing. According to White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, Iran is beginning to, quote, look for an exit ramp. Leavitt went on to say that if Tehran failed to accept the reality of the situation, President Trump was ready to hit the country even harder and, quote, unleash hell. Trump on Monday set a 5-day deadline for Iran to negotiate a deal to end the war. According to the semi-official Fars news agency, Iran is focused on achieving its strategic objectives in confronting the opposing side, and only if those are met would an end to the war, not a ceasefire, be possible. With the news Tuesday that the U.S. was sending troops from the 82nd Airborne to the Middle East, House Speaker Mike Johnson was asked if the dispatching of additional troops to the region portends American boots on the ground.
It sends a signal to Iran that they better get their act together. We need to resolve this quickly. The objectives have been met. We have to get the Strait of Hormuz straightened out. I'm optimistic that's going to happen. The buildup of troops is very different than boots on the ground. We don't have boots on the ground, but I think Iran should watch that buildup, and they need to take note of that.
That's House Speaker Mike Johnson. Meanwhile, Iran's state-run Press TV says that the country won't allow President Trump to dictate when the war ends. President Trump and Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping will hold their summit in Beijing on May 14th and 15th, following a delay. Trump had postponed the meeting from earlier this month to focus his attention on the war with Iran, which has brought fresh strains to U.S.-China ties past economic differences. Xi will then be visiting Washington later this year. The U.S. Supreme Court has thrown out a copyright infringement verdict against Cox Communications, undercutting music industry efforts to hold Internet providers responsible for piracy by their customers. In a unanimous vote, the justices said Cox couldn't be held liable for failing to shut down the accounts of people who repeatedly downloaded and distributed songs without permission. A federal appeals court had upheld the finding. Shares of Sony, Warner Music, and Universal Music all fell on the news. SpaceX is considering a fundraising target in its IPO of about $75 billion, according to people familiar with the matter. The Elon Musk-owned company could seek a valuation in the IPO of more than $1.75 trillion and is weighing a market debut in June, though the timing could still shift. The company is weighing a ballpark figure of around $75 billion in its initial public offering. Democrats have won yet another special election, this one in Florida for a state legislature district that includes President Trump's Mar-a-Lago home. The district was previously won by a Republican by 19 points, while Trump won the district by 17 points in 2024. The chairman of the House Democratic Caucus, Pete Aguiar, talked about the stunning victory.
This is the president's state representative, is a resident at Mar-a-Lago, and oh, by the way, he voted by mail. Overwhelmingly, in the competitive special elections over the past 12 months, Democrats have outperformed. This just sends a resounding message to Republicans around the country that the American people are fed up.
That's the chairman of the House Democratic Caucus, Pete Aguiar. JetBlue is reportedly considering the option of selling itself to a competitor. That's according to Semaphore, citing people familiar with the matter. The New York-based airline has hired advisors to explore the viability of a deal and is considering scenarios of a tie-up with United Airlines, Alaska Air, or possibly Southwest Airlines. JetBlue is also checking to see how such a combination would sit in the political and regulatory environment. Wall Street is cutting its forecasts for the U.S. economy this year, raising its projections for inflation and unemployment and increasing the odds of a recession as the impact of the Iran war starts to come into view. Goldman Sachs says the risk of a downturn over the next 12 months has risen to 30%, with the jobless rate climbing by the end of the year. Several other firms say inflation will be closer to 3% this year than 2%, which will eat into disposable incomes while hindering companies from hiring. And finally, NBA owners voted to explore adding franchises in both Las Vegas and Seattle, according to people familiar with the situation. Industry executives and insiders anticipate the bidding for each expansion team will start at $6 billion. Since the NBA last expanded back in 2004, with Robert Johnson paying $300 million to buy the Charlotte Hornets, team valuations have increased over $10 billion. That's news when you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Dan Schwartzman, and this is Bloomberg.